everyone, my name is Annie, and I'll be speaking a bit about Xcode and Swift today. And I'll be following that up with a short demo on how to edit the UI view for your mobile app. So at the 2014 WWDC, Apple introduced a new programming language called Swift. And the development of this language began in 2010 with an Apple software engineer named Chris Latner. And when he finally unveiled it to the Apple executives, they were so impressed that they put a handful of really experienced engineers working with him to keep developing this language. And 2 years later, it became a major focus of the company. And it's now used to build apps for Macs, Apple TVs, iPhones, iWatch, iPhones, iPads, yeah. Here you can see a list of apps that Apple uses. And they have started to integrate Swift or completely integrated with Swift for these applications, especially the dock. And there's a number of other applications that are using Swift as well. Prior to Swift, apps were primarily written in Objective-C, and it's been Apple's longtime programming language. Hundreds of thousands of programmers were using Objective-C to build apps for iPhones and iTouch. So you can imagine it was a huge surprise to any developer who's been writing Objective-C to build these apps for decades. And as a novice developer whose biggest complaint about Objective-C was generally it being very difficult to learn, this was a really great news. So here's a little example of Objective-C versus Swift. Swift was actually built with the foundation of Objective-C, and in fact, Apple first introduced Swift as Objective-C without the C. But Swift also draws a lot of influence from languages like Ruby and Python, and these languages are meant to be very user-friendly or beginner-friendly and intuitive, and you can see Swift actually reads very close to English, so it's really easy for people to pick up. So Xcode, this is a free software package that's also developed by Apple, and it was released back in 2004. It's used to write code for OS X and iOS, and it is an integrated development environment, so it can produce an application into this one software package rather than being connected by scripts. This means that Xcode comes with an editor, a compiler, and other tools that work together to build your app and ultimately submit it to the App Store. And I've played around with it a lot, and I've noticed a lot of really great things about it. But one of the greatest things is that it can track down errors really early on. So you can immediately see the problem, and it would actually not process your application. It won't build if they see that there's an error. So it can really help maintain and manage your code base as your app grows in size and complexity. So Apple also introduced a feature called Playgrounds back in Xcode 6, and it's an integrated, interactive development environment, and you can experiment with your code with Playground, and you can really see it coming to life. And if you have animations and stuff, it will actually move, and you can play around with it by clicking and dragging. It's really great for debugging and testing your code, but not really good for actually running the application. So that's where Xcode comes in. So I want to dive a little deeper into the files that come with Xcode. So when you open up a new project and you say you click on the single view application, it automatically comes with these files, and it also has these boilerplate code. And to start off, the app Delegate Swift handles a lot of the high level app events. So these are events where the application is running on a device, and it's when users press the home button for the application to go in the background, or if you want the application to come back, or this is where you also write code where you want certain data to be saved before the application goes into the background. So a lot of the code can be written here. So this image is of the single page application, and when you're building your application, this is where you want to write the code in the view controller Swift file. And this is where you manage the interaction between the data and the user's view. And then I'm going to be showing you this in a second. So this file, the main storyboard file, this is basically what you see, what you want the user to see. And this view is actually controlled by what you write in the view controller file that I showed you previously. But in a more complicated app, there can be more views and more controllers that handle the views. So here, this is just like a single page application with only like a few squares, but it can get really complicated with a lot of, you can see like the entry point of the application with the arrow, but it can really like manifest into these like huge, this huge application. Let's see. So what you see on the storyboard here doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the view of your phone, because there's actually like a really complex system in place where you need to govern all the rules of how everything's going to be placed and aligned. So I'm not going to be going into that today, but there's a lot of like constraints that you need to add to this so that it can actually be viewed on an iPad or iPhone 6 or iPhone 7 Plus, so it can actually work with these different sizes. So this is actually a really cool feature that I found in Xcode, and it really like just kind of gives you into like a peek into how the hierarchy is in your app. And this is actually in the debugger mode, and you can view this by clicking on the little bottom button. But yeah, you can see the different layers, and you can see how this like exploded 3D render, you can like click on it and just kind of experiment with all the different buttons and features and stuff. Okay. Oh shoot. Here. Okay. So I wanted to show you how easy it is to actually build this app, and with almost like no coding, which is pretty cool. Okay, so how I made these little squares is by going to this like view, and I just like literally just dragged it in here. But there's a different way to do that. You can actually write some code. So you'll see here that it actually built, and it doesn't have anything other than this, but I'm going to be writing a little code in there. Save it, build it. Sorry. One sec. Okay. Okay, so now you see that the code that I wrote in is actually in the build. So there's two ways to do that. And in order for you to interact with your views, like these each item, as well as like buttons and stuff, you can actually really easily just drag it into your application, and then it will write it for you. So there's two things. There's outlet and action. An outlet is basically a variable, and an action is a function. So I'm going to say click function, next, and then I'm also going to drag this in here. And this is an outlet, so it's going to be a variable. So I can write something here that says, when I click this button, I'm going to make the green disappear. So it's really as easy as that. Oops. Actually, yeah, green. So you just do that. You build it. Okay, thank you.